I love video games, and that's okay. The golden years of video games were from 1990 to 2010, or so I'd like to believe. Pokemon, Super Mario, World of Warcraft, these massive unshakable titans of gaming we know and take for granted today were just little baby infants taking their first steps into the then uncertain world in those days. Being an only child, I was introduced to video games by my older cousin at a very young age. The first memory I have of a video game was me gazing in awe over my cousin's shoulder as he'd run around a two-dimensional world, battling and taming fantastical monsters to collect weird trinkets with his trusty yellow raccoon. Now, my cousin, he was a gaming fiend. Being 4 years older than me, he had every console out there at the time, along with every game he'd ever wanted. And our families were pretty close, so when I grew old enough, he passed a few of them down to me. Lucky, right? The first gaming console I ever owned was a hand-me-down from him, a dusty 10-year-old Atari 2600. The games used to come in cartridges that you have to blow in before slotting them in, or else they wouldn't start. I still remember the nail-biting confusion of trying to plug this into my dad's old TV in his musky, makeshift home cinema, just to play a couple hours of Sonic the Hedgehog and Paperboy. The graphics weren't great back then, but what we lacked in pixels, we made up for in imagination. I was probably like 5 at the time, so you could say I started my gaming journey pretty young. But it wasn't until I pestered my parents enough to buy me my very own Game Boy Color to rival my cousins did I really get hooked. From there, I got a PlayStation 2, a Game Boy Advance SP, a PSP, Nintendo Wii, and an Xbox. But while these consoles were great and all, my true love didn't come around until about my 11th birthday, when I got my own gaming computer. Check it out. Yeah, it didn't have the best graphics at the time, or even a keyboard for that matter, but I loved it all the same. And that's when it all started. Not to brag, but I probably have over 20,000 hours played across all my video games. 4,000 hours into Smash, 1,000 into RuneScape, double that on Dota, 10,000 hours in this game you probably never heard of from 2002, and the rest in the wonderful world of Warcraft. Yep, I spend most of my free time in college and university playing these games. And to any unsuspecting viewers out there, that might seem like a lot, but it really isn't. Not when you have noobs to own, cards to farm, and achievements to grind. So as my course mates were going off, making new friends and going to parties, I stayed cooped in my cramped little room, committed to my video games. Not because I enjoyed them, no. Enjoyment is for normies and casuals. Real gamers are devoted. Now you might be thinking, damn, don't you run out of things to do? And that's the beauty of MMORPGs. You can play the game however you want. There's always an infinite number of ways to spend your time. The game never ends. So each time I get bored and feel like quitting, I just force myself to set new goals, each one harder to achieve than the last. That way, I would be occupied for longer, never be bored, and could clock even more hours into my favorite games. Something's not right. A voice deep inside me whispered, but I didn't stop. How could I? I was way too deep in the hole, and even if I did manage to climb myself out, there was nothing waiting for me out there in the real world. Over the next few years, it became harder and harder for me to sustain the same love I had for video games. Call it getting older or the pressures of society on a not-so-young man to start growing the hell up. Whatever it was, I felt it. I remember regularly going to bed as the sun rose, feeling like a complete loser after a 6-hour gaming binge. But I kept at it anyway. After all, gaming was everything I'd ever known. This was the point in my life where I struggled with finding purpose. I felt lost, disposable, like I hadn't yet justified my own existence, and that I absolutely had to. I just didn't know how.
Hey man, I'm getting married.
I don't have many friends, but for the ones that I do have, I do a lot for. So I packed my bags, took 2 weeks off of work and hopped on a plane destined for Sigulda, a small city in Latvia, an even smaller country in Northern Europe, where the wedding would be held. I was with my girlfriend and we wanted to make the most of the trip, so we visited 2 other countries as well, England and the Czech Republic. It was great. Art, music, food. We spent our days walking through the streets of Prague till our feet hurt, looking for new places to explore, and taking more pictures than either of us could count. In London, we reminisced about our uni days, taking each other to all our favorite hangout spots, and met up with a bunch of old friends. Well, she did. I met up with like 2. And then, the main event. The most beautiful wedding I had ever been a part of. Surrounded by good friends in the middle of the Latvian countryside as the autumn leaves fell. I watched as my best friend promised the rest of his life to his future wife, all while I had no idea what I was doing with mine. A few goodbyes and a couple 10-hour layovers later, I was back home, and I don't know, a mixture between sad and angry is the best way I could describe it. See, after the exciting adventures and the heartfelt reunions, what was waiting for me when I returned to reality was nothing but an empty bank account and pent-up existential dread. Because, to be honest with you, I probably wouldn't have even been able to afford the trip if my parents didn't offer to pay for my flight. I saw how my friends were making progress with their lives and careers, and I was so sincerely happy for them. But at the same time, I was so sangry at myself. Why was it that all my friends were storming through life, settling down and making the big bucks, while I still wasn't even able to pay for my own holiday? How was I supposed to give back to society and to the people who invested so much into me? Was this what video games cost me all this time? I had a choice to make. To slip back into video games and act like nothing ever happened and remain a boy, unprepared for the world, or to start aiming at something real, something challenging, and start busting my ass like a man. I spent days agonizing over this, thinking about the comforts I'd have to sacrifice to even start chasing this new dream, or so I'd like to tell you. But the reality of the situation was, the second I took an honest look at my life and compared it to what it could be in 2 years, the choice had already been made. Sure, it was going to be a lot of work. Sure, it was going to be scary and uncertain, but the alternative of staying a baby for the rest of my life terrified me way more. My sadness sublimated into anger. And that anger lit a fire under my ass, becoming the fuel I so desperately needed to start pulling myself out of that hole. For the first time, I realized that there were things I craved that no video game could ever satisfy. The need for real adventure, the resilience to stand up and face the world, and the urge to succeed in life and provide for the people most important to me. This was it. This was how I justify my life. As I strained to pull myself out of that dark, shifting place, finally landing one foot on solid ground, I looked up to find a sense of purpose I thought I'd lost so many years ago. Oh man, that was so cheesy. And that's why I quit playing video games. Not because I lost interest in them, not because anyone told me to, but because as I grew older, I figured out that I needed to start growing up too. I loved video games, and that's okay.